to see what they make out of KT's Game 1 win.
Thank you, Doa. Want to start with the picks and bans because we saw a huge priority placed on this Darius right out the gate for Someday, who performed on it extraordinarily well through the group stages. But this means you're leaving up the Tahm Kench on the other side, which, as a caster team, we've been throwing around that this might be the strongest champion in the tournament.
Yeah, well, going into the matchup, okay, how can the supports get themselves the best pick for their team? You know, Tahm Kench obviously has a lot of tools to prevent people from dying, but don't you forget about Thresh. Thought Thresh would be a very powerful pick, and it really was. You know, he also has an even more threatening way of saving people with that Lantern. I mean, even we saw in the group stage how creative they can get with those Lantern saves. I did not like KT's composition. I felt like it had a bit of a lull in terms of ending the game if KOO were to play the game in a 5-man death ball, which they tried in the early game and mid-game, but eventually they kind of stopped.
I feel like the big thing that I want to highlight when it comes to the draft is KT's side, they kind of have this early game going on for them. They have the Rex side, the stronger jungler. They have the LB as well in the mid lane. So I felt like the big play for me that KOO Tigers that kind of sealed, didn't seal the deal, but in my mind could have sealed the deal was the big power play that kind of, when they used the Tahm Kench ult to put 5 people top lane with the Rex side, which was beautiful to me because KOO Tigers as a team, I feel if they're grouped as 5, they're the strongest. And KT, to me, when they're split up, as they were in the later parts of the game, they're the strongest.
Yeah, and that's what I think ended up happening is KT were trying to just... KOO was running KT around the lanes, picking them up, but then they started having 5-on-5s, and KT goes, wait a second. That's not what we're supposed to do. We should be flanking these guys. We should be coming from the sides. And then they figured it out. And that's one of the things I love about KT is their warding strategies. And you heard it on the desk there at the very end, that when they get those wards down, they place more wards than any team in the entire world per minute. That gives you so many TP flank opportunities. That gives you those deep wards. That gives you that pressure that you can play around. And that's what started happening is we saw multiple TP flanks come in from Someday, and then he was able to execute on the Darius. Even though he had the most deaths for his team, he also had the most kills. So a lot of participation there. In the
now
game.
KT ekes out the win, due largely in part to a massive team fight around the Dragon 26 minutes into the game. And Zyrene, I'm going to let you take this one away. 5 for 1, plus Dragon, plus Baron off the back end of this.
It was an incredible swing because when you look at these compositions, you think there's going to be such a hard time for KT to close this game out unless they get a large lead. But what ends up happening in this fight is everything basically goes wrong for KOO. The event horizon is used early, and you'll see it here, stun nobody. And then the arrow comes out on the only person who can cleanse it and negate it. And then after that, the hook comes out that ends up hitting Veigar. It hits Kuro. Dragon goes over to score. They're like, oh no, okay, here comes the arrow. Cleanse it. It's out. Hojin no longer has a gap closer. Here comes Block. Look at this hook. Onto Kuro. Pulls him right into the barrel at the right angle. And then he flashes, and so does Gorilla. So 2 flashes are down. Now Someday decides it's time to go in. They get the kill onto Veigar, and then they throw them in the choke point. You're there with a Darius and a Hurricane Callista right on Spike.
I think the biggest issue to me when I see this fight is KOO Tigers, they kind of forget what their composition is about the moment they lose the Dragon. They are supposed to be the ones kiting.
Exactly.
They're walking right into a Darius, into a LB, into a Callista, and they've burnt all of their key abilities. They're the ones supposed to be running away from the fight, not just running into it.
Even bigger than that, against KT's composition, who's really only engaged is either a random hook, which we saw work, don't get me wrong, that can work, but it's just a Gragas Flash. Gragas Flash is your biggest engage tool. It gets blown immediately. Okay, in exchange for 1 Dragon, that means you have 5 minutes of just grouping and doing whatever you want because you know you're not going to get engaged on. You've got the Ashe, you've got the Veigar, you've got the Tahm Kench. You are never going to get engaged on unless you play horrendously. And they should have seen that as an opportunity of safety instead of a situation of panic, which is what they did with the cooldowns. Just wasn't there in understanding how important it is their CC because he could have even run away.
Exactly.
They had the Scuttlecraft.
That could have just been Dragon going over to KT. They ended up trying to use the Veigar E offensively, then they used the arrow, then they used their Rek'Sai tunnel to try and get in. They tried so desperately to engage that, and that just seemed from a frustration perspective because they were like, well, they're here, we might as well fight them.
And this is where I want to return to your earlier point, Crumbs, about KT's composition and its inability to close games effectively, especially given KOO's comp and their ability to kite. We saw even after that Baron was taken and a slight gold lead went in favor of KT, there was a substantial portion of the game in which they were unable to make any progressive moves.
This event horizon from Kuro, I don't know what he's doing at that point. I think he thought Someday was just going to run straight into them. But then Smeb runs to the right side and he's like, oh no, Someday's over here. So these are the skirmished out fights. Even though it's a 5-on-5 when you just look at the entire thing, it's really sections of 2-on-2s and 3-on-3s and 1-on-1s in this fight, which I thought was very well played from KT because they had 2 teleports on the left side, but then the home guard got him on the opposite side. So you had LeBlanc on your left and then you had Darius on your right, and you really had to pay attention to all of these threats at the same time.
I think it's all about identifying what is your win condition, and in this particular case, we had a Darius that was stronger in the split push, a LeBlanc that is stronger in the split push as well. That will allow you to get these wards out, and eventually you'll get that flank that you want. And also, like, to speak to the Veigar point and KOO's play on Veigar, I think it was slightly weak, simply because in the group stages against UG, we saw that KOO, they were banning the Veigar, so you can almost assume that KOO hasn't really practiced Veigar before this week. So he's sure he has been practicing Veigar all week, but I'm not too impressed by it.
I mean, it's kind of like those Yu-Gi-Oh matches. You beat one, you get their card, but then you don't know how to play it at all. They beat CLG, they're trying to play the Veigar. It's just not there. You know, I wasn't convinced by it whatsoever. And even during the laning phase, he fell behind, I think, 30 CS, even after LeBlanc wasted the teleport towards the lane. So really unimpressed with that Veigar play.
All right, well, KT Rolster have taken game 1, and we'll be right back with game 2 to see if KOO Tigers can tie up the series. Don't go anywhere. The action continues in just a few minutes.
KT and KOO, Korean rivals, and it is time, guys. Who's ready for some League of Legends? I think they can. The heal was nearly enough. Someday pulls him in. Oh, and he gets 1 for 1. KOO with an early lead in this fight. Someday and Arrow in a little bit of trouble. Peekaboo already on the way out, and Someday gets knocked up. In fact, Someday got that kill. And now KT comes in. A huge apprehend by Someday, and KT all over the KOO Tigers. There's the ult, and here come the resets flash with the apprehend as well. Nice grab onto Kuro from Peekaboo, and this fight is all KT. Game 1 goes to KT Rolster.